Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce, recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Western Caucus has several members here tonight. We would like to talk about what is going on right now in the country. The administration seems to be waging a war on the Western jobs, and that is carried out through a whole range of activities. A couple of weeks ago, the President said that the administration is not doing enough to address the high gas prices. The President said in his speech at Georgetown that he would like to cut foreign oil by 1/3 by drilling at home. Well, we have been in the process of offering him the solution to what he said he would like to do. Now, keep in mind that while the President is saying one thing, he's doing another. While he says that we would like to drill for more oil here, understand that he has increased the moratorium on the offshore drilling. They've made it more difficult to drill in on-land areas through the Rocky Mountains. Know that they rejected Shell Oil Company's $4 billion NEPA study because a paragraph was omitted. So while we're hearing bold language from this administration about increasing the amount of oil that we're drilling here at home, and that would create American jobs, but it would also create lower energy prices, understand that it appears that the President is not following through on what he said. So in the past couple of days, this Congress, this House, has passed out H.R. 1229, which says that we're going to put the people back to work in the Gulf of Mexico. I think everyone understands that BP is accountable and should be accountable for the problems that they caused. But we should not have killed 100,000 jobs offshore. Our nation is stuck at 9% unemployment. We are stuck with a deficit that is having to be financed by our own Federal Reserve. We're putting the nation's economy at risk because of the way that we're treating jobs and because of our deficit. So we're saying put the American workers back to work in the Gulf, produce American oil, produce American jobs, and bring lower prices of gasoline to the consumer. The same bill improves the safety by reforming current law. It sets timelines for the Secretary to act on permits to drill. Right now, one of the things that the Secretary is doing is holding off approvals for those applications for permits to drill the APDs. Know that the administration has within its power to improve the situation with jobs immediately, but instead they're doing the things that harm our work. H.R. 1229 also establishes expedited judicial review processes. We also have passed in this House H.R. 1230, which says we're going to restart American Offshore Leasing Now Act. It passed last week. It requires that the 4 lease sales in the Gulf and Virginia take place. Those lease sales were previously scheduled, but instead of going ahead with them, the administration has put them on hold. Let's simply produce the energy which has been verified to be there, which would create American jobs, and which would aid American consumers by lower prices of gasoline. H.R. 1231 has also been passed, which reverses President Obama's offshore moratorium. The President made a big deal just after he was sworn in 2 years ago about reversing the moratorium. But after one analyzed the moratorium that he reversed, we actually saw that he increased the moratorium, that more areas were put off limits to drilling rather than the message that he gave the American people. So H.R. 1231 says to the President that we would like for you to join us in creating American jobs, jobs that the West would be proud of, jobs that would produce energy, jobs that would produce high-paying careers, not just jobs. We believe that these are the things that the American people are looking for. This is the leadership that they're asking for out of Washington. H.R. 1231 requires each 5-year offshore leasing plan to include lease sales in areas containing the greatest known oil and natural gas reserves. Our offshore areas are tremendous reserves of energy. All we have to do is tap into them and use them. It requires the Secretary establish a production goal when writing the 5-year plan. I'm joined tonight by several members of the Western Caucus. Each one has got their own particular interest area where the administration appears to be conducting a war on Western jobs. So tonight, to lead off, I would like to yield time to my good friend Cynthia Loomis from Wyoming, and I would yield as much time as she would consume.
Mr. Chairman, I thank the gentleman from New Mexico for yielding. I appreciate his leadership of the Western Caucus and look forward to this robust discussion tonight. The West is rich in natural resources, and natural resources, their good stewardship and using them for the benefit of our country is what the West does best. This administration is turning its back on the stewardship that is available in the West as we produce our natural resources, and instead is taking away the jobs, the environmental progress, and replacing it with further dependence on foreign energy from places like Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. We can produce our own energy in this country between the resources of Canada and the United States. We can produce enough energy for us to meet our foreseeable needs. But that requires us to use the technologies and the jobs associated with those technologies that will create tens of thousands of jobs, in fact, hundreds of thousands of jobs. Instead, we're actually going in exactly the opposite direction. Let me give you an example. Fracking technology is advancing dramatically the ability of America to recover its rich natural gas resources. And it allows us to do so by casing a well with perforations. There is an explosion that cracks the tight sands or the rock. Then fluids are forced into these gaps in the rock, keeping the seams open, allowing this gas or oil to percolate back up the well casing and be produced, allowing Americans to use American-grown energy. But the attack on fracking technology is based not on science, but on the idea that fracking could damage drinking water. None of us want to see our precious drinking water polluted by contaminants that some people believe are being used in fracking fluids. So the states, knowing their own geology better than anyone in Washington could, and the very diverse geology that is different from state to state. You're going to be hearing later this evening from G.T. Thompson, a member of Congress from Pennsylvania, where the Marcellus Shale Formation is being produced. I am going to talk about the use of fracking technology in my state, where the geology is very different from the Marcellus Shale, but where it can be used in a responsible manner to produce American oil and gas with American jobs. The Wyoming Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, recognizing the concern that our drinking water could be imperiled, set about and created a set of rules and regulations to disclose the contents of fracking fluids and the processes that are being used by companies that are fracking wells in the state of Wyoming. Those rules are being used to provide people with the information that's needed to assure them that fracking fluids are not contaminating our water. Furthermore, there have been repeated stories, using an example from Wyoming, in Pavilion, Wyoming, of an area that some argue was fracked to the detriment of local water wells. Well, we're learning more and more about those water wells. And what we're finding is out of over 100 water wells in the area, only about a fifth of them are permitted, and some of them are not even cased. Well, this allows for the natural percolation of gas into water that has nothing to do with fracking. If we look at the science and apply it correctly using good stewardship principles, we can produce oil and gas and have good drinking water. I even have a photograph from someone in my home state, Mr. Chairman, that has a flame coming out of a pond. The flame is a consequence of a natural methane seep coming out of the water that has been on fire as long as this gentleman can remember. These are natural phenomenons. We need to make sure that we are assuring people in this country that drinking water will be safe at the same time we recover these resources. Those very assurances require scientists, they require environmental companies, they require fracking experts, more jobs, more oil and gas, more diverse energy for the American economy. And of course, clean burning natural gas provides us also an extension of the air quality that we value so well. These are American jobs that can be saved, nurtured, and grown and used successfully all over the United States, on and offshore. And Mr. Chairman, you just acknowledged a project in the Beaufort Sea, which is off the coast of Barrow, Alaska, 87 miles. Shell has put $4 billion, as you pointed out, into preparing to produce that resource, and still does not have a permit to produce it. And at some point, those investments begin to devalue their sunken costs in a way that may make companies like Shell look elsewhere. That takes jobs away from America and into countries where we're competing for jobs, and in places that sometimes are not our best friends when it comes to foreign policy and human rights. So, Mr. Chairman, let's produce oil and gas with American jobs, with good pay, with good benefits, and with the residual goal of having an all-of-the-above energy policy that benefits the West and the country as a whole. I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady for her comments, and we're joined tonight by my good friend, Mr. Thompson from Pennsylvania. Before I yield time to him, I'd like to walk through just a brief list of some of the other ways that the government conducts war on Western jobs. Consider the listing of endangered species. No one of us wants to see a species be extinct or go extinct, but what we've seen is an extreme interpretation of the rules which kill jobs at the same time. I think that there are ways that we could keep jobs and preserve species, yet we're not doing that right now. The coho salmon was listed as endangered. As a result, the farmers in the Klamath Basin in Oregon have been forced into bankruptcy due to prohibitions on water use by the listing of the salmon. The Methow salmon, water rights holders in the Methow Valley of Washington lost the use of their water, and property owners and timber owners face restrictions on their properties because of the imposition of egregious stream buffers to protect the listed salmon. The listing of the salmon in general, the court case over whether hydroelectric dam operators have done enough to prevent the deaths of salmon in Washington and Oregon. Billions of dollars have been spent to accommodate, according to the Bloomberg Business Week, but the environmental groups continue to sue. The northern spotted owl, the listing has killed the entire timber industry in much of the West, especially Northern California and Oregon. The Mexican spotted owl, that listing also killed the timber industry in New Mexico and Arizona. Hundreds of thousands of jobs have been lost. The Delta smelt, the listing of that species, the small 2-inch fish that lives in the San Joaquin Valley, killed 27,000 jobs there. The San Joaquin Valley was the source of 80% of our nation's vegetables. Now, those vegetable farms are gone. Bankruptcy. We're now importing food from countries that can spray pesticides that are outlawed in this country, so our food supply is less safe. Fewer jobs, bigger government deficit, greater cost of vegetables, and less safe food supply. The gray wolf was listed by the Fish and Wildlife Service as endangered and has killed agriculture and mining jobs throughout the West. Still, the list goes on and on. So it's not that these are just hypothetical ideas that the war on Western jobs is occurring by our government. These are ongoing processes. One group, the Center for Biological Diversity, has declared that they're going to list over 1,000 species this year, that they are going to petition for the listing of over 1,000 species this year. Understand that their lawyers get reimbursed at the rate of $350 to $500 per hour for every lawsuit they bring against the government. Every lawsuit that kills jobs provides employment for the lawyers in those groups, so know that the taxpayer is footing the bill and yet losing jobs in the meantime. I'd like to recognize Mr. Thompson now for as much time as he might consume. Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Well, I thank my good friend from Hobbs, New Mexico, for yielding, and it is representing the part of Pennsylvania. It's an honor to be a part of the Western Caucus. I represent Western Pennsylvania and Central Pennsylvania and a little bit of Eastern Pennsylvania. My district is so large, so rural. It has many of the same issues, Mr. Speaker, that fit very well within the Western Caucus. We have public lands, all these issues you were hearing about tonight in terms of what government does as a huge barrier and to kill jobs. There's the same things that we certainly experience in Western Pennsylvania. Now, I'm proud. I chair the largest committee in subcommittee of agriculture, conservation, energy, and forestry, and so I want to go down another road in which of how government kills jobs, Western jobs, whether it's the West or Western Pennsylvania, or frankly throughout the United States. We recently had a hearing reviewing the proposed United States Forest Service plan, and our national forests it's very clear to differentiate. They are not national parks. Our national forests were created to provide us sustainable resources, predominantly timber. But timber is not the only thing. Our forests were created to provide us energy, access to oil, to natural gas, to coal, to minerals. So that's why they're put in existence. And as we look around the nation, certainly in my congressional district, we have my national forest is relatively small compared to, I think, some in the West, 513,000 acres, but it is profitable and home to the world's best hardwood cherry. It's got a management plan that says you should be able to, in a sustainable way, to keep the forest healthy, they're supposed to harvest over 90 million board feet a year. And yet for over a decade they've been doing 20. There's national forests. One of the members of my subcommittee talked about, Mr. Sutherland talked about his national forest. They harvest 0 board feet out of his national forest. Now, there's a lot of problems with that. First of all, if you don't harvest timber, you don't manage that forest in a healthy way. You subject yourself to wildfires, to invasive species. It creates an unhealthy forest, but it also kills jobs, and that's what we have seen. We have seen that all across the nation, in the West, frankly, all parts of the country with our national forests, where the Forest Service has failed to do its job in terms of managing the forest, I think, in a productive way. And that point came out very clearly in the first of what will be, I think, a number of hearings that we're going to do on this issue. Frankly, timber production is down. Now, I'm proud to say that it's up to 40 million board feet in the Allegheny National Forest, but that's only with persistence of kind of being with the Forest Service almost on a constant basis. but it's still a long ways from 90, and the production of timber's down, and that means timber jobs, first of all. Our sawmills, our timber industry, those jobs, in many parts of the country, those jobs have gone away. They're extinct today. And the forest products jobs that come as a result of having that timber supply are going away. And the economies, our rural communities were taken in order to create these national forests by the federal government. And the economies of our rural communities that make up those forests depended on the promise that was made when the forests were formed, that the timber industry, minerals, oil, gas, coal, all those sustainable resources would be provided, would be produced, and that would maintain the economies of those rural communities. Well, that's been a lie by the federal government. They haven't done that. They haven't met their responsibilities, and that has killed jobs and killed our economies in rural communities. In terms of energy, in my district, I was sworn in for the first time in Congress in January 2009. Within a week of when I was sworn in, the Forest Service chose to place a moratorium on any new drilling permits in my national forest. Now you have to understand, my national forest, 93% of the subsurface rights are privately owned. So these are owned by private individuals even. And they came in and imposed this moratorium because of some lawsuit that, as my good friend talked about, that the taxpayers paid their lawyers, paid the organizations to file, basically. And we went over a year with people losing their jobs, families suffering for just that reason. Now, thankfully, a federal judge overturned that decision. And, of course, the Forest Service appealed, and the federal judge threw it out again. And now the Forest Service has appealed again. They've taken it to a different court, down to the Philadelphia court, and we'll see what turns out there. But that's just another example of just bad government. My good friend, Mrs. Loomis from Wyoming, talked about the Marcellus natural gas, and let me just say that's all private sector. The government's not involved in it. Natural gas is mostly private lands, and it works. It has created over 88,000 jobs in Pennsylvania. I have counties that, for the first time in history, their unemployment rates are below both state and national averages. Prosperity is a good thing, and everybody benefits, not just the people that are getting the royalties or the leases, but frankly, the churches, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the Little Leagues, the fire departments, the hospitals. Because rural folks are generous and they support good causes, and so the communities are growing. The annual average tax annual earnings are going up. Frankly, government's benefiting because local, state, and even the federal government's getting a little more tax revenue by all that economic activity. And unemployment's down, and energy security is there, and it's lower energy costs for everyone. And you know what? It's private sector. If the government owned that land, we'd never be experiencing those benefits. And although despite that fact, despite these are private lands, and I'll end my comments with this because I know we've got other members that want to speak tonight, this administration is going after that natural gas production. They are. There are some in this body that are proposing federal government overreach. We're accessing that energy as a good steward. We've got regulations. The Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania is a tough agency, but they do a fair job, and they're always looking at their regulations. But we've got this administration who wants the federal government to employ the EPA and to send them into Pennsylvania and other parts of our country where we're producing domestic energy, which will essentially shut down our energy production. And it will shut down this prosperity. It will shut down these jobs that are being created. It will shut down the movement that we're making towards energy security. And so I want to thank my good friend from New Mexico for hosting this hour tonight. Proud to be a part of the Western Caucus. Proud to be with you this evening. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania for his comments. And so far the quote of the night is that prosperity is a good thing. And yet our government seems to have a war on prosperity. Why is our government trying to undermine the economy when we're struggling with high deficits and unemployment? It defies imagination that's going on. I'd like to recognize now my good friend from Georgia, Mr. Brown, for as much time as he might consume, and I appreciate you being here. Georgia and Pennsylvania and the Western Caucus. That's the way it should be. We're west of somewhere. Thank you for your being here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Pierce. I appreciate your yielding me some time. But let me go forward with what Mr. Thompson was just saying and what you were just commenting on about prosperity. Just today, I had a businessman in my office relating to me a conversation he had with one of the Democrat senators, liberal Democrat senators, and he was talking about the issues that concerned him and his business. And she was arguing over and over again about how government needs to do all the regulatory constraints on business and how businesses need to be taxed higher, and it's not fair for businesses to be making money and at the levels that they are. In fact, just today we saw some of our Democrat colleagues talk about the oil companies and the kind of money that they've been making with the increased prices of gasoline. And finally, in frustration, this Democrat senator said to this businessman, he says, all you're concerned about is profit. You just want to make a profit. Well, that's what business does. It makes a profit for its shareholders. If it's a corporation, it makes a profit for the small businesses. The policies of this administration, the policies that we've seen from our Democrat colleagues when Nancy Pelosi was running the House, now with Harry Reid running the Senate, and certainly the Obama administration, they're trying to destroy profits. They're trying to destroy our economy, in my opinion. And in fact, the president himself has said that he doesn't mind seeing gasoline prices go up as long as they go up incrementally. He doesn't want to see the massive increases, but as long as they keep going up. His own energy secretary, Dr. Chu, fairly recently said, somehow we have to find a way to make gasoline in the United States at the same price that it is in Europe, which is roughly $8 a gallon today. The policies of this administration are doing just exactly that. Today in the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, we were talking about fracking. And the EPA scientist that is studying fracking admitted that there's not been one single incident, not one, where fracking has been implicated in contaminating drinking water. Not one. But I believe this administration is doing everything it can to try to destroy energy production in this country and trying to destroy the free enterprise system. And in fact, the president himself said that if his policies go into effect, to use his own words, energy prices will, quote, necessarily skyrocket. Well, who's going to be hurt? Who's going to be hurt when fuel prices go up and food prices go up, and not only gasoline and diesel fuel? I was talking to a restaurant, actually a manager in a restaurant just last week in Athens, Georgia, and asking him about his food prices in his restaurant and what's going on because of the high cost of gasoline. And he said his suppliers are adding a fuel surcharge onto the cost of the foods that he's buying and selling in his restaurant. And it's the policies of this administration that's doing that. Just yesterday, I had a constituent of mine who's an egg producer in Georgia come in and talk about some of the issues that he faces. I am from Georgia. I'm a good Southerner, and I love my grits and cornbread. Now, for folks who are not Southerners, grits are made from corn. And cornbread, obviously, that's self-explanatory where that comes from. I think even Yankees will know that cornbread comes from corn, too. So the thing that I, as a good Southerner, I just cannot see driving down the road burning up my grits and cornbread in the fuel tank of my GMC Yukon that I used as my office, actually, when I was making house calls as the medical